The dentist. I was one of those rare people who actually enjoyed going to the dentist. It helped that I had great teeth for a 28-year-old woman with 0 cavities to my name. Touch wood. I also liked my dentist. You could say I had a soft spot for him. He reminded me of Tom Selleck's character in Friends, not just because both of them were referred to as doctors, but because my Dr. Jenkins also had that sexy, middle-aged man aura to him. Such a pity that he was married. I had been in the waiting room for some time while I managed to kill the boredom with my phone. TikTok, Instagram, Amazon, Facebook. You name it. And if it weren't for the notification on my phone warning me that the battery had 20% remaining, I wouldn't have realized how much time had passed. I immediately went to the receptionist to complain about why I had been made to wait for over 3 hours for my appointment with Dr. Jenkins. The receptionist politely apologized before advising me to make my way into the treatment room and that Dr. Jenkins would be right with me. When I entered his room, I expected to be greeted with another apology or a joke about how long the wait was, but I found the room completely empty. I felt awkward standing there, wondering whether I should lie on the dentist's chair. I didn't want to appear rude, so I spent a few minutes exploring the room instead. But those couple of minutes honestly felt like 30, so I made the bold decision to lie down on the dentist's chair. The second my bum touched the leather, I heard the door conveniently open. There you are," the dentist said with a relieved look on his face as he approached me. "We were all worried about you." As soon as I heard his voice, I knew it wasn't my Dr. Jenkins, which only irritated me even more. Instead of responding, I found myself staring at him. He didn't strike me as a dentist, despite him wearing that standard white coat that they all wear. Perhaps my reason for questioning his authentication was because of his baby face. He didn't look a day older than 21. "Where's Doctor?" I asked with a disoriented look on my face. "Jenkins," interrupted the dentist. "He won't be returning to this practice." "What?" I said louder than I meant to. "Why? What's happened?" "Sorry, I can't get into it. It's a legal matter." His response left me speechless, as I lay still on the dentist's chair with my mouth wide open. "If you could just open your mouth a little wider, please," the young dentist asked as he raised his mirror probe right into my face. I noticed his other hand had a sharp scraper tool. I had waited long enough for my appointment, so I did as he requested. "Oh my," the dentist said out loud as he examined my teeth. "Dearie me. What have you been eating, Nev?" I tried to tell him I always look after my teeth, but my words only came out as mumbles due to his instruments fondling my mouth. "Just a second, Nev. I'm not quite finished." The dentist began scraping my teeth using his utensil. I could feel my mouth uncontrollably flinch when his scraper poked against my gums. I thought he would have apologized, but he just kept on going. Okay. "I have some bad news, Neve," he stated before removing his tools from my mouth. "Unfortunately, I'm going to have to remove some teeth today." I was too busy easing the pain in my sore gums with my finger before I eventually comprehended what he was suggesting. "What?" I shouted as I removed my finger from her mouth. "I haven't had a single cavity, so why would I have to lose a tooth?" "Well, you see, Nev," the young, imperturbable dentist said, "there's a reason why you're still single at your age." It wasn't the first time since entering the room he had left me completely speechless. I wanted to scream at him and tell him his job is to treat patients' teeth and not judge them, but I couldn't move my lips. "I have a thought," he said out loud to himself. "Let me grab my tools." The door suddenly swung open as the dentist reached for his sharper tools. That's when I heard a familiar voice. "What are you doing with my patient?" the voice yelled. A wide smile appeared across my face, while I peered over my shoulder to find Dr. Jenkins standing, holding the door open with a scowl. He took his eyes off the other dentist to subtly direct a smile in my direction before returning his attention back to the imposter. "Are you even a qualified dentist?" Dr. Jenkins continued his interrogation. Instead of answering, the man slowly turned and winked at me before he ducked under Dr. Jenkins' arm as it held the door open. The impersonator managed to get out of the room while Dr. Jenkins chased after him, leaving me speechless once again. I remained lying on the dentist's chair when I noticed the dentist's light above me was still on. I found myself staring blindly into the bright light until my eyes suddenly adjusted. Seconds later, I found myself in my bed, staring at the sunlight shining through my bedroom curtains. I slowly exhaled when I realized it had all been a dream. I knew I wasn't getting back to sleep after that mental dream. As I got out of bed, I began chuckling at how random it had been. Later that day, I found myself food shopping. I didn't need to grab much since I had an early flight to London the following morning. I thought about picking up something for my dad, maybe one of those fresh strawberry tarts he loves. I could surprise him with one. My old man hadn't been well of late. Of course, he claimed to be fine while my mother did all the worrying. I also grabbed a banoffee pie for my mom. That should calm her nerves down for at least 2 minutes, I thought. My mom had been caring for my dad ever since they both retired, but I could just tell as they got older that it was becoming more and more overwhelming for her. As I wandered up the dairy aisle, I oddly had to take a double look at someone as we walked past one another. There was a second where I thought, maybe I knew this person. My attention was briefly swayed as I cheerfully loaded my shopping basket with a strawberry tart and a banoffee pie. I now had everything I required. While waiting in the queue for the self-checkouts, I saw that same man again, the one I couldn't pinpoint earlier whether I knew him. I stared at him for a good couple of minutes. I was concentrating so hard on cracking the case that I didn't hear the woman behind me as she tried to grab my attention to notify me of a checkout becoming available. I only snapped out of it when the unknown man glanced at me while I continued to blatantly stare at him. From his gaze, it was obvious he didn't know me. He probably just thought I was checking him out. He did have one of those cute baby faces. Mother of God. That was when it suddenly hit me. That was him, the baby-faced dentist from my dream. I slowly began using the checkout while I looked at the young man one more time to double-check. There was no doubt in my mind he was the imposter in my dreams. While I scanned my groceries, I had to question what this meant. Was this some kind of sign? Did I need to make an appointment with my dentist? Or did the universe want me to ask him out? The man had gone by the time I had paid for my goods. As I walked towards the exit, thinking about it, the more it ate away at me. I should have followed him. There must have been a logical reason why I randomly dreamed about a complete stranger. I was too busy thinking about this guy when I crossed the car park and didn't notice I had walked right in front of a moving car. Luckily, the driver saw me first. It wasn't until I reached my car that my brain finally registered that the same man from my dream was also the driver of the moving car. I quickly jumped into my car and threw my groceries on the passenger seat floor before hurrying. As I went to drive out onto the road from the car park, I froze. I didn't know which way to go, left or right. It was 50-50. Time wasn't on my side, so I made the quick decision to go left, only because it was the opposite direction of my home. And I had a hunch. Further up the road, I stopped at a red light. There were numerous cars in front of me, so I tried to peer out my side window to see if I could spot the green Mini Cooper, but I couldn't. I started to panic. If the Mini Cooper wasn't in front of me, then he most likely turned right at the supermarket. I was just about to do a 3-point turn when I noticed the light was now green, and cars had begun driving in my direction from the other side of the lights. I was gutted that I wouldn't be able to find out who this unexplainable guy was. But at the same time, I was also relieved that I no longer had that anxious feeling. As the cars in front began to move, I forced myself to forget about the man and the Mini Cooper. As I drove on, all I could think about was where it was best to turn so I could head back home. That's when I spotted the roundabout up ahead. Perfect, I thought. When I indicated to turn right, I was actually making a full turn to go back the way I had come. During that action, I realized there was a green Mini Cooper actually turning right. I didn't believe it at first. I thought looking at the registration plate would somehow jog my memory, but it hadn't. By the time I thought about it, I had already passed the turning for the road the Mini Cooper drove off on. I had another split second to decide whether I should call it a day or follow the car. I decided to let that butterfly feeling in my tummy have its moment. So I went full circle once again around the roundabout before I raced off after the green Mini. As luck had it, I was able to catch up to it. I felt like a police officer trailing a bad guy, so I had to make sure not to get too close, or I might have risked giving my presence away. Who knows? Maybe this guy recognized me in the supermarket and was now paranoid. I followed closely behind him while my mind drifted into odd theories. My first thought was maybe we had a one-night stand together, but he was most likely in his early 20s, and I would have remembered sleeping with someone recently who was that much younger than me. That theory led to perhaps I had kissed or spoken to him in a bar one night and was too drunk to remember. Then I suddenly remembered what he had said to me in my dream. There's a reason why you're single at your age, Nev. Was that the actual reason? Was it because I went out too much? Or the fact that I tended to drink a lot when I did, which would explain why I didn't meet many men, because I was too drunk to make a proper connection? That could explain why I'd been using Tinder for 18 months with no success. Maybe I'd matched with him on there. During that moment of going down the rabbit hole of my life, I followed the Mini into a housing estate. I began to feel nervous. I knew this was all just about to come to an abrupt ending. I stayed well back so as not to scare him. I even made it look like I was stopping outside another house as cover. I slowly parked my car as I watched the green Cooper do the same. His doors swung open. I then had this nervous feeling in my stomach because I knew I hadn't planned what I would do next. The young man would enter his home, and I wasn't prepared to go to his door and tell a stranger I had a strange dream about him. As quick as that awkward feeling appeared, it disappeared even sooner when a female exited the car. I watched on as she entered her home, with no sign of the man anywhere. I messed up. Oh well. At least I have a funny story to tell. Moments later, while I headed home, I decided to forget all about the whole situation. I knew it was best to put it to bed after I began to believe that I somehow had psychic powers and that my dreams could predict the future. And that man was some con artist that the police were desperately after. I shook those thoughts completely out of my mind. As I looked down at my bag of groceries on the passenger side floor, I saw that my dad's strawberry tart had fallen out. I couldn't tell whether it was bashed or not. It was then that I decided I would go visit my parents. Maybe my mom might have an interesting take on my dream. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, I was suddenly in awe when I noticed what type of car was parked outside on the street. A green Mini Cooper. But that was impossible. How would that guy know where to find me? This was all too weird, and I wasn't having it. It was clearly another dream. So I decided to stand in silence on my parents' driveway until my unconscious self decided it was time to wake up. I awkwardly stood there for a couple of minutes until I felt raindrops begin to fall from the sky. As the water soaked onto my skin, it became clear that I was living in the now, and this moment was real. I let out a long exhale. I hurried towards my parents' front door before letting myself in. As I removed my shoes at the door, I heard my mother call out after me. "Yeah, it's just me, Mum," I shouted back. When I walked into the living room, I immediately searched the room for the man, but he was nowhere to be seen. Both my parents were sat down. My mum was on the 3-seat sofa, while my dad was sitting in his reclining chair. "Ah, Neve, what a nice surprise," my dad said while he smiled at me. "I thought you were going to London today?" My mother asked. "I leave tomorrow morning. I replied while I turned around and began looking around the hallway to see if the man was there. What are you looking for, Neve? My dad asked. Nothing. It's just I saw a car outside and I told them before I was interrupted by a sound coming from the kitchen. Is there someone else in the house? My parents looked at one another until my father slowly looked at the floor. The expression on his face looked like shame. Well, Neve, your father and I didn't want to worry you too much after his little accident. But we decided he needed to get proper care. A split second later, the man from my dream appeared from behind me. He had a cup of tea in each hand as he placed them both on the coffee table between my parents. Sorry, would you also like a cup of tea as well? He asked me, before he suddenly paused with a confused look on his face. Did I just see you at the supermarket? I didn't know how this guy had managed to do it, but even in real life, he left me speechless. Neve, my mom said to me, this is Mark. Mark smiled at me. He's here to help out. We never really got around to telling you that it was your father's breathing problem that was the cause of his accident. So it turns out that he has chronic obstructive pulmonary disease due to all those years he smoked. My dad looked over at me with his sorrowful eyes. I just didn't want you to worry about me, sweetheart, that's all. I'll get you a cup of tea, Neve, Mark said before he left the room. I sat down next to my mum. I already knew that my dad wasn't doing too well. The fact that he had a carer didn't actually surprise me. But what I couldn't get my head around was how I somehow had a dream about him. My mum gently placed her hand on my thigh. Don't worry, Neve. Your dad's going to be okay. My dad still looked like he was uncomfortable, so I made sure to go over there to give him a cuddle. It worked. I managed to steal a smile from him. As I sat back down on the couch, Mark appeared with my cup of tea. So, was that you earlier at the supermarket? He asked me again. Yeah, that was me. Why? I thought I recognized you, that's all. As soon as he said that, I felt my jaw drop. So we do know each other. Finally, an explanation. So how do you know me again? I blatantly asked. Mark looked at me with a dumbfounded look on his face. Then he looked at my parents with that same look. You already knew my daughter, Mark? My dad asked. Mark still couldn't shake off that demented look on his face. Should I be embarrassed? I jokingly asked. Did we sleep together or something? Mark shook his head. Well, just tell me then. I literally only just met you a minute ago, Mark finally explained. But you just said, I know. But look. He interrupted me before he highlighted with his finger all the pictures of me scattered around the walls. The fireplace and anything with a surface. I've been helping your dad out for over a month now, he explained. All your parents talk about is you. I gazed at my parents as they smiled at me. But that doesn't explain how I know you, I suddenly blurted out without a second thought. Mark looked at my parents once again, who both shrugged their shoulders. I haven't got a clue as to how you would know me, Mark said as he awkwardly shook his head. Honestly, today is the first time meeting you. He kept staring at me while I sat in silence until I looked down to the floor. I felt like I had made this difficult for him. Is there anything else I need to do for you, Mr. Shields? Mark asked my dad, who shook his head. Mrs. Shields? Did I forget to get anything from the supermarket? No, Mark, you got everything, my mom replied. Thanks again. You've been a massive help. I was still looking down at the carpet. I was too embarrassed to look at anyone, especially not Mark. Well, that's me for today, Mark told my parents. I'll be back on Monday at the usual time. Thank you, Mark, my dad told him. Don't mention it. Nice meeting you, Nev. I finally looked up. And you. He smiled at me before he proceeded to leave the room. I felt so relieved that he was leaving. Oh, Mark said as he suddenly reappeared at the door. I left your lab coat in the kitchen, Mr. Shields. Thanks again for letting me borrow it. I also made sure to clean all the fake blood off it. See you all later. Mark walked out the lounge door once again, and then, seconds later, I heard the sound of the front door closing behind him. My parents never said a word. Were they embarrassed for me? Or were they quiet because it took them over a month to tell me Dad had a carer? Wait a wee second. What was that about a lab coat? The last thing Mark said before he left? What did Mark mean when he said thanks for the lab coat? He borrowed mine for a party, my dad told me. He borrowed your old lab coat for a party? I reiterated. Mark was telling us both last week. My mom explained that he was going as a zombie for Halloween. So we told him he should wear your father's old lab coat, and he could be like a zombie doctor or a scientist. Or a dentist, I abruptly said out loud. Yeah, I guess so, replied my mom. Maybe that's where you saw Mark, my dad said. Oh, when he came to collect the coat, my mom added. You must have seen Mark leaving wearing my lab coat last Saturday, my dad explained. He forgot to take the coat with him on Friday, so he stopped by on Saturday to collect it. You must have seen him leave when you came by to visit us. I couldn't believe it. They had done it. My parents had cracked the case for me. I felt rather stupid for not being able to work it out for myself. I then found myself laughing out loud. Wait until I tell Cheryl about this tomorrow when I fly down to London to see her.